All right, welcome back to the Art of Show. Today, we're talking with Samantha Youssef about how you can use movement and form to help you be a better character illustrator.
Welcome to the Art of Show, where we feature the people who are creating amazing stories for kids. Join us as we chat with children's book illustrators and authors, storyboardists, animators, and more. Now, their art might be for kids, but aren't we all just kids at heart? Here's your host, Brandon.
All right, what's up, guys? Hope your summer is still going great. We've got a great interview for you here today. We've got Samantha Youssef, who is a animator extraordinaire, as well as an awesome illustrator and now teacher. She actually worked with Disney right out of the gate, right out of college. She worked on some movies like Lilo and Stitch and Bambi 2, as well as a bunch of different ones. And really her claim to fame came after she left Disney. She started doing some consulting, especially in the gaming industry, about how people can use movement and form in their actual illustrations to make their characters stronger. Samantha has a cool background that she is actually a ballerina as well, and she uses just everything she's learned about being a ballerina and how you do poses and how the body actually works, and translates that into her drawings. And so you still get the really cool life and the really cool feeling that you want in animation, but maybe it's not as extreme as some people like to pull or push poses. And so we really get into kind of her process as well as her story, and then her teaching, and it's actually through Studio Technique, if you guys want to look that up. And then she's got a book out called Movement and Form, where you really can break down how the body works and how you can translate that into your own illustrations, and you can make your characters and character animations stronger. So if you guys like what's going on here on YouTube, the biggest way you can help is hit that subscribe button down below and give me a thumbs up. That would be awesome. And leave me a comment with what you are working on. I'd love to know. But without further ado, let's dive into our interview with Samantha.
Alrighty, well, welcome back to the Art of Show. We're hanging out with Samantha today, calling in from all the way up in Canada. Thank you so much for hanging out with us and chatting about character design and form and your kind of art journey.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll kind of get into it. And so growing up, I know you probably have a history that I don't think anyone that I've talked to has,
Really?
and that's with ballet. And so so was that something just as a little girl growing up, like you wanted to be a ballerina, or kind of how did that play into your story?
Yeah, I did. I just really loved it. I've been doing ballet since I was 3, and I was part of like a proper ballet school. So I had my regular classes, regular school, and then I had also like 6 hours of ballet afterwards and stuff.
Cool.
So I just always took it seriously, but I loved it. I always really loved it. There was a time for a while that I did want to see it through professionally, like for after school and everything. But my parents were very big on me maintaining all my academia, and it wasn't, they were very supportive in me doing it. But I think when it came down to it, they didn't want me to do that for the rest of my life. But I really, I did really love it. And I still do ballet I go to my ballet classes every day and stuff. So it's still a big part of my life and my passion. But I have really bad feet and turnout for ballet, so that was always something I struggled with more than what other people would have naturally or whatever. So that was always my every dancer I think fights with their body to some degree, but that was always my my issue and stuff.
Yeah, that's so cool. And so ballet was definitely a part of your story, still is part of your story. But was art also, was that something as a kid that you were really into as well?
Yes. So my parents were both surgeons, and they really encouraged me to, they put me in a very academic private school. So I had that with and ballet, I guess, was my creative outlet growing up. But I really did love to draw all the time, but I never had art classes, and it wasn't something that I was exposed to, I guess. And I didn't have any friends. The school that I went to, I didn't have any friends that drew. So I didn't know, this was like before the internet when I was a little kid. I didn't know that you could study art for a living. But I know that my parents I always loved Disney, and my parents told me even when I think it started around when I was 3 or even before 3, they used to pause Disney movies on the TV for me, and I would redraw the frames
fun,
and stuff, draw the characters. So like I can't even remember when I started drawing. It was just always through my whole life, like one of my favorite things to do. And then I just didn't know that you could do it. And I would buy all the Disney art of books, and things like that. And you'd read about these artists that did it. But I just thought, well, they must have, grown up in LA and had a friend. I didn't know. I didn't even know how they did it, and so it was only when I got to an age where I was applying for colleges that I found out that I could, that there was a really good art school that specialized in animation and drawing. And I decided to apply. But prior to getting in there, I had no, aside from drawing by myself, I had no, training or anything like that.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah. So was it always animation then that you kind of gravitated towards in that whole world?
I guess, I mean, it was really just anything involving drawing and storytelling,
okay.
Right? When I think about it, because I loved, like, there were some comics that I loved, or growing up in Montreal, we have a lot of the, there's a huge French influence here. And so we would get a lot of the graphic novels from France that I think are now becoming a bit more mainstream.
Yeah.
Translated to English, but they didn't used to be, right? So we would have all of this in Montreal, and I used to love a lot of those graphic novels. And every time that I just saw something that was, I loved, like, children's book illustrations. There were artists that I loved. So it really was the drawing, but I think Disney always inspired me the most. And all these books that I had of, like, all their concept art and the 2D animation and creating those characters and stories, I think that always intrigued me a lot. So I was just always drawing, characters. And but I originally, I thought as an artist, I didn't really understand the process of going into animation. So I think that, if I had, like, when I would do things on my own, it was always with this idea of doing illustrations, and I would just illustrate stories and things. Yeah, I just like to draw, I guess.
So you said your parents would pause Disney movies. Was there one that got paused the most? Like, what was your favorite growing up?
I mean, my earliest because I don't remember, I guess, so much when I was 3, but I remember drawing from Mickey and the Beanstalk.
Oh, really? Okay, cool.
Or it was, I remember really liking to draw that harp. That I don't know why, but I was just drawn to that character. Maybe because I was a girl and I found it very appealing or something. But that's the earliest memory. But then following that, I mean, I remember I was really young when Roger Rabbit came out. I don't remember how old I was, but that was something else I remember drawing. I used to draw characters from Roger Rabbit when I was really young, and then Little Mermaid was huge. That whole new generation of Disney was really huge for me. So I think whatever film came out that year, I just spend the year, obsessively drawing the characters and stuff.
Yeah. So is it Sheridan College? Is that right?
Yes, that's where I'm going.
And it was for a degree in animation?
It was. It's a degree program now. When I went, it was a different program it had a lot of teachers from the hand-drawn Disney feature department, and it was more of a private, like a boot camp school or something. It didn't offer an undergrad at the time, but it meant that it was really intense because we didn't have you couldn't do a 3-credit course with X many hours. It was just this massive amount of work, and we were constantly drawing all the time. It was great. When I look back, though, it was great. I mean, at the time, I think, we were crying ourselves to sleep half the time, but it was really, when I look back, it was really good drawing training, at least.
When you look back at especially your formal education in college, from maybe where you were before to when you got out, what were like some of the bigger things that you say, like, you learned and you developed as an artist because of?
I think my awareness and appreciation of how valuable life drawing was. I feel that gets taken a little bit more for granted now when I go in to do workshops or lectures at colleges. I feel like that's maybe because of the nature of how, at least in the animation industry, how it's changed, that people maybe, or some programs think because it's CGI, they don't need to study the human body as much or something. But I find that I think that there's so much to be learned from that sort of more academic way of developing your talent. And I think that was the one thing that I had no awareness of before, because I was always drawing characters, and I didn't understand that in order to draw anything well and to make better decisions as an artist, you had to cultivate that, I guess, academic kind of drawing and stuff. So yeah, I'd say that was the big eye opener for me, for sure.
Was form then always a part of something you're interested in too, especially with poses, or was that something you kind of naturally did?
You mean like just like shapes and forms and like that?
No, yeah. I think I was reading an interview a little bit earlier that you had done where you talked about some of your ballet experience had kind of like translated into art, but maybe you didn't realize it as much. Like you naturally just got how like poses worked and all that. Like, was that something that you picked on up then as well?
I didn't pick it up until I was at Disney.
Okay.
When I was in school, I just didn't put two and two together, or I think I was putting it together, I guess, somewhere in my mind, but I didn't consciously articulate it. And I guess when you become very conscious of something, you can kind of, I guess it empowers your art in a way. You can control it more, and then you always draw upon it. And I guess, I didn't know, my teachers always told me that I was very good at observing gesture. And I guess I had a good sense of when I looked at my poses, whether they felt right or not. And I think now I know, now I'm very aware. And that's what I try whenever I'm teaching or training artists, I try to bring as much of that without them being dancers. I try to bring as much of that insight into artistic terms, I guess, visual artistic terms for them as I can, because I find that, since you're 3 years old, you're observing poses or choreography and you're trying to copy it with your body, which means you just have to see it and understand it. So, and it's so subtle because it could just be little variations of movement that mean like the world in dance. And I found that translated really well to understanding, not just generalizing it when I draw, but actually being very specifically aware, I guess, of what's happening in a pose. So yeah.
Very cool.
It took a while to put the dots together, and realize what I was doing with my drawing.
Yeah. Very, very cool. So once you got done with college, you mentioned Disney. Was that your next step, or did you kind of have some transition years?
No, I got hired from school. Disney came to the school and went through our portfolios, and they recruited me from school. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, I was really lucky. I'm really grateful for it. I did do some, in the time that I was at school, over the summers and stuff, I did do some work at studios, as an intern, or sometimes I was animating at a studio, but it was always with the intent of going back to school. So when I was done school, though, Disney was really my first official full-time job after school. So I was very lucky.
Was it weird when you went in and started working, since you'd kind of grown up on the movies, and was it almost surreal as you kind of went in and started working with these folks?
It really was, especially meeting, because then once you're in, when I was in high school and when I was a bit older and I was reading my art of books, and not just looking at the pictures, I guess, but really, I would really read them. And I was inspired by these artists. Mark Henn was one of my earliest inspirations. He's the one that created Jasmine and Aladdin, and he did Mulan, and he did a lot of the Disney heroines. So I don't know if that's maybe why I was drawn to him, but I really always loved his work. And I remember reading an article with him in I don't even think it was in the Art of Aladdin book. I think it was some magazine that had come out around the time, and I had saved it. And he was talking with the voice actress that was the voice of Jasmine, and he was talking about how they were going to create this character together and bring her to life. And it was just such a nice thing to read. And so I was so inspired by these people. And so then to go to Disney and actually meet those people was really it was really amazing, to get to know them and get to work with them, for sure. It was, and I also felt horribly intimidated because I felt, any day they're going to realize that I don't deserve to be here or something, and they'll fire me. So it was the level of talent and everything there was just so impressive. And but it was very surreal at the beginning. I was so excited about it. So it was pretty.
Now, was it, were you in California or were you there when the studios are in Orlando too?
Orlando and then Paris.
Oh,
and
wow.
Then
Okay.
Australia. Yeah, they had a few studios, but then slowly they were closing them. And for a while, there wasn't even anything being done in LA, and a bunch of people from LA came down to Australia as well. Like those that didn't have families and stuff came to Australia to work on some projects too. So LA was like I tried to stay at the other studios because I guess I'm more used to a European style of living. So LA has always been like a foreign kind of culture shock to me with the way the city is set up and everything. So I tried to work at the other other studios.
So when you were at Disney, did you have any favorite projects that you got to work on?
I did. My first experience was doing a little bit of rough in betweening on Lilo and Stitch. Okay. That was really like fun. But I'd have to say my favorite project, and I think it always surprises everyone because it's not like one of the big blockbusters, but I had the most fun working on Bambi 2. Okay. It's just a Bambi sequel. It went into the theaters around the world, but not in North America. So no one here has really heard of it. But I think that was one of the most enjoyable projects that I had the opportunity to work on because I got to work really closely with Andreas Deja, who was the artist that did Scar and Jafar, and one of these people that I was growing up with, and we were on the same. I was on his team, and so it was just so exciting to. He's been a really big inspiration to me, and he's just such a nice, like for anyone that's met him, he's such a nice person too, just a really wonderful person. So the experience of working on that project with him and some of the other artists on that team and the training that we went through on that film, because we got to go and spend a lot of time on like deer reserves and stuff, studying deer we were just outdoors, drawing deer all day. And I was getting paid to do that. I just thought it was amazing. So that was, I think, for sure one of my, my favorite projects in the end to work on. The experience was amazing, and I learned so much. And I think that was the other thing too, is that I felt like I went through a bit of a learning curve on it because I was working more on Feline and Bambi's like dream sequences of Bambi's mother, but also he had an adoptive mother because it takes place after his mom dies. And so drawing these realistic deer walking around in environments and through perspective, like I on a technical level, I learned a lot working on that project too. So I think, that one would probably have been my favorite.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you're at Disney, and I know you're not currently at Disney. So kind of how did you, what happened as you're kind of leaving the studio, or how'd you get out of the studio?
So I guess what was happening was that in the around 2009-ish, we were transitioning so much into CG, and it was the writing was on the wall, obviously, that there wouldn't be any more 2D feature, and even the projects that we were working on were starting to get more like direct to video, or maybe a credit sequence here or a short film there, but it wasn't like the full, the movement was transitioning. And I guess at that time, I really wanted to be a 2D animator for the rest of my life. Like I wanted to be like Mark Henn and Andreas and Glenn Keane and all of these incredible artists. And I knew that there were still studios that were doing 2D feature. So I decided I didn't want to transition into CG at Disney, and I went to go continue drawing at these other studios. And I went to Yowza Animation in Toronto, which is a team of former Disney artists from the LA studio that were originally from Canada, and they opened up their own studio. And because they had a rapport with Disney, they would also get projects like Enchanted and Frog Princess and other titles from Disney. So we, in that way, I was still able to work on certain projects, but I went over there. But then the work again got less and less in 2D. So that's where and that's where I eventually met Edward, because I sort of was at this crossroads of, I love to animate and I love to draw, and I didn't know. I was trying to learn some CG, and I was trying to develop my skills as a character designer. And that's where I've realized now, like, I still miss the animation. I love the performance part of it, but at the end of the day, I really love to draw. So I decided to just stick with my drawing. But having had the exposure to CG and everything, I started getting asked to come in and do animation direction at some gaming studios in Montreal. It started with Ubisoft. And they asked if I could come in and work with the team in the cinematics department and share some of the insight that I had learned at Disney. And they also helped train me a bit more in CG. And then that way of working with talent started catching on with other studios, and they started asking if I would come in. So then that's where I went on this venue of, I don't know, I guess it's like consulting art direction.
Yeah.
And now I find myself doing a lot of work at studios where, because I draw and animate, I can work with the concept artists, because concept artists now tend to be more painting oriented than drawing oriented. So they don't think about how it has to translate into assets that the animators will use. So I'll go in on a project and I'll do draw overs of the concept art, then work with the character artists that are building the models and help make that work a bit better, and even work with the programmers to help them understand how it should animate. And then they help build those controls. And then I work with the animators to make more aesthetic. I do draw overs on the CG animation so that it has more of a drawing kind of feeling. So, but it all just kind of happened, I guess after I left Disney, it all fell into place. And in the meantime, I would just do any kind of freelance work that I could still do as a 2D animator or as a character designer, as I started working on, learning more about design and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's so cool. So, so Studio Technique, then, did it kind of just morph out of that, like giving you kind of like an entity that you can like work through?
That's exactly what it was. Because I guess what happened was, after my once other studios started asking if I could come in and do sort of training their teams, instead of jumping from studio to studio every 2 months and then not knowing what the next contract was, I made a company so that they became my clients. And that's where and then the company name, I needed something, because originally when I started, it was in Montreal, and we have all these bilingual laws. So I had to have a name that could go for both French and English.
Oh, really?
So
I didn't even know those were laws. That's crazy.
Yeah. In this part of Canada, there's a lot of legislation that everything has to be either only French, or if it's bilingual, it's French first and then English. So that's why I wanted a name that could work in both languages when I initially incorporated it. So I made that, and then that's sort of the company that I provide all of those training services under. Or I wrote a book. I eventually, over time, I started through that experience, I started building a drawing program where that same idea of like identifying what it was I took from my dance and from 2D animation, and understanding how 3D animation works, and building a drawing program that works for a range of artists. And so I'm working on publishing 3 books for that. And the first book already came out, but I published them under the Studio Technique company. And then as an artist individually, I still work as myself.
Gotcha. That's cool. Now, is that Movement and Form? Was that the first one?
Yes, that was my first book.
And so
thanks.
that one was a Kickstarter, is that right?
Yes,
I was looking at it. What was it like putting together what you were teaching into like a book form? Like was that hard? You're like, there's so many different things you're working on. What was that process like?
Well, it took a couple years to write the book, because I wasn't able to work on it full time. It was always, around contracts, either working with studios or doing character design projects or animation contracts. And then what helped in the end was the last few months of it, I got an editor on board, and they really helped me to. They were a great editor. I'm going to work with them again. She didn't impose any of her writing on me, but if there were gaps, she'd ask the right questions that I had to then answer. And it really helped me work a bit faster and get that done. On the one hand, though, the book and the two that will follow it, together they're a drawing program that I built over 7 years. So at least the program's already been there. I just had to, the outline is there. I just had to, write it all out. But that was a big challenge because I guess the way that I don't have any education as an educator, but the way that I like to teach is, I guess, the way that I felt I learned the best, and the way that I learned from ballet, which is very hands-on mentorship. It's like ballet is very much a master apprentice kind of thing. Even though you're in a class, you really need to have somebody working on you and training you. And I felt the same when I was at Disney. Like, I learned the best by sitting, having these other artists that were so much more experienced than me sit down and draw over my drawings and tell me how to improve. And so when I teach people, I really like to be very hands-on with people. And that was my big challenge, is I didn't just want to put information into a book. I wanted to do my best to make it seem like I was there, even though I wasn't. So that was, I think, I hope it came out like that. I don't know what it's like to read my book for the first time, but it was a completely new world to write a book like that, and I found it I found that very challenging, because I'm used to talking with my hands or drawing pictures, being there for people. So that was hard. That was very hard.
Yeah. So when you're going into studios or when you're teaching classes, is there like something you're going to hit, like people are going to struggle with, like maybe something that's just super common kind of across the board?
Yes. Actually, my whole system, I always have people struggling with it. I think because I work I tell people to draw in I don't want to say it's a formula, because it's not. It's just that I like them to work in a specific way, because, it's like working looser to more tied down. If you tie things down right away and put in all these details, if there's something wrong with it, it's not in a place, your drawing's not in a place that you can fix it easily. So sort of in that way of thinking, I like people to work in a certain progression. And the first step of that progression is obviously the gesture work, but I don't take my ideas of gesture from drawing concepts that I've learned. I take them all from dance. So to get people into the way that I work, it's really hard, because they don't, I think at the beginning, sometimes they don't see, because it's not like anything they've learned before. So they don't agree with it, because they have their way of working, and they want something. I think a lot of artists that are, especially professionals, when I work with professionals, they want training that is kind of similar to what they already know, but maybe just adds another level of insight. So to get them to unlearn everything and rebuild is very challenging. Although the good thing is, I've never had people that at the end of one of my workshops feel dissatisfied with it. They usually really love it and embrace it. But sometimes we waste half the workshop trying to get people, on board with this new way of approaching drawing. So I think that's usually my across the board challenge.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And this might get more technical than you could describe, but when you mention the gesture that folks are naturally going to come across if they've been trained on as an animator versus through ballet, if you're going to look at two of them, how would you distinguish? Like, is it a feeling, or is it like a technical piece?
Yes, I think that it's I don't know how to describe it, like a weakness in the pose, like a sense that they can only sometimes make these poses feel like they're alive by an extreme caricature, sometimes like an extreme distortion of the contour lines or the shapes, like a strong, like if I'm reaching like a strong straight line here, then they achieve a dynamic sense in the silhouette, but the pose itself is quite flat. Or it wouldn't translate through, I guess, as an animator as well at Disney, like in the hand-drawn feature days, we used to have to be able to draw anything from like an anatomically correct, like Tarzan or, Kerchak, like the silverback gorilla, that's so, realistic and has muscle and bone and weight. And also be able to do very cartoony characters as well. You had to draw everything. And so when I look at some of these, just like the only time I see people accomplish really dynamic gestures is by shape deformation, but that's restricted to characters that literally are very graphic. And so, and I can see, I guess, the limitations of their understanding of how that, I guess, pose would be built, that there's a disconnect that sometimes people do. They simplify the gesture as like an energetic representation of the skeleton, but then there's always every jointed area gets disconnected from the flow of the pose. And so I try to get them to see how it's more of we're trying to see the energy that flows through the body, but not energy in the way that, say, a lot of fine arts schools that studied Nicolaides, the natural way to draw, where they have like just a lot of energy because their pencil lines are energetic, but it's not the actual like flow of the pose. So that I find that's usually what I find is very apparent to me, especially now with I find at least in animation, there's a big ballet has for some reason in the last couple of years, which I love, but it's become very trendy in animation. Like a lot of students and animators right now, like it used to be martial arts a few years ago. Now it's ballet. Like everyone just has an affinity towards drawing it or animating it. But I guess because it's something that's so close to home for me, I see the lack of understanding of the posing even more so in that kind of work, because that's an action that I understand or something.
Yeah. In the martial arts, because that's when you're talking about how all the systems flow together. The only other time I've heard people describe that is when they're describing like moves in martial arts where you're rooted in the ground and that flows all the way to the end of your finger and all that, which is so cool.
But I find that it is like that. I find that it's a subtle thing, but it's the difference between, say, like a Madame Tussauds wax museum figure versus like a real person, that you can always tell that it might look real, but it doesn't feel alive in the same way. It's that invisible thing that I at least that's what I try to get people to see. And I feel that the best way to find, for myself, the best way that I've found to capture it is by using the things that I learned from dance as opposed to the things I learned from drawing and stuff. So
that's cool. That's so cool. That's so cool. Well, I definitely need to get your book and dive into it. It's really cool. Well, as we're kind of wrapping up, I know we're at 30 minutes. Is there, who are kind of the folks that you're learning from now? And something when I kept looking through your interviews, it seems like you're just like a lifelong learner. Like anytime you can find something new to learn, you're going, especially I think when you were younger, but is there maybe folks you look up to now whose work that really inspires you?
Yeah, I'm very inspired right now I've always been inspired by John Singer Sargent. I'm still attempting to meet his level of draftsmanship. But in my industry, I'm really, as a designer, I'm really inspired right now by Corey Loftus, who's art director at Disney, and he did a lot of concept art years ago for a studio called Carbine on this game called Wildstar. And I just love I like Corey because he has a wonderful balance of shape design with strong drawing ability and expressiveness. So I love how he's found this like really nice balance in his work. So I love his work. I am currently really getting into learning more about different animals and creatures. So I've been inspired a lot by Terrell Whitlatch, and I love her work, and I love Ian McCaig's work as well. I feel like I'm probably missing out, like now that I'm just thinking, I've always loved, like I said, there's all the 2D people that I grew up, always being inspired by, but I think right now those are the people that are my big nemesis.
Yeah, that's awesome. When, are you familiar with like Mermaid and
Yes.
and so I know Corey was doing that in May, and he would like post something that he had done that morning, and I was like, I couldn't do that in like 3 years. Like it's amazing. So it's so really cool.
Good. I also love actually who works with Corey is Byron Howard, who was Corey's director on Zootopia, and Byron was a 2D animator at Disney originally, and he's not an internet presence, so no, he doesn't share his drawings, but he's also, you know, as equally talented as Corey. Like he can draw. He was the animator responsible. He designed and drew Kenai in the Brother Bear film, Cobra Bubbles, and Lilo and Stitch. But now he's directing, you know, at Disney, and he directed Zootopia and everything. But he's an incredible artist, and I love his work too. He's amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, sweet. Well, if folks want to keep up with you, especially with the work you're doing and the work that they're teaching, any good places that you would send people to?
I have a Twitter. I guess I could message those to you. I've got a Twitter, an Instagram, a Facebook page, a blog, a Tumblr. So when I'm terrible at posting, but that's my goal this year, is to post more of I do a ton of artwork that I never post. Yeah. So my goal is to try to post more this year, and especially now because I just got back from London a few weeks ago, so I'm settling back in, and I want to start just doing that on a regular basis. So I have a bunch of different social media things and stuff where I share my. Easier for me to like send those to you?
Yeah, if you just send it to me in a message, and I'll make sure to include them in the show notes. And for folks that are listening, this is episode 35, so you'll be able to find the show notes, or if you just scroll down, you'll be able to see them. And as far as Studio Technique, is it just studiotechnique.com?
Yes, studio-technique.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's good.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your time and chatting. So it's your work is awesome, and it's so cool to see you teaching it too, what you've learned, and I appreciate you hanging out with me.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.